I want to offer you the warmest of welcomes. Thank you so much for tearing yourselves away from this rare flash of sunshine and coming into this highly enclosed space, but full of energy and some magical ideas. For this Marmalade session towards spatial justice, building the Oxfordshire Commons. And it feels appropriate to kind of be here, Oxfordshire Public Library. So we're in one of the best pieces of social infrastructure in the city, a public space, a commons of sorts, and right in the heart of the city. And it's a really important moment for us. So I should say I'm Andy Edwards, one of the co-founders of Makespace Oxford, and we have a lot of our team here. It's a really important moment for Makespace Oxford as we're kind of peeling back and opening up to the public for the first time a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes to culminate in our refounding process, where we're continuing to make change in the here and now, but recognizing that we need to deepen our work and raise our ambitions. And what better place to do that than at Marmalade Festival, where it's not just in the spirit of that kind of think global, act local, but it's actually about bringing those levels together and trying to act at all levels of the system. And that's part of what we hope will be explored in the conversations over the next 90 minutes to 2 hours. And I think before I hand over to Bex, I just want to encourage you all to just make yourselves as comfortable as possible and to really kind of embrace the dream space. We spend a lot of time, and I'm sure all of you do too, and I know from a lot of friendly and familiar faces, in the doing, kind of in the activist mode. And this is an opportunity to step sideways from that activist mode and embrace the kind of dream space and allow ourselves to kind of imagine otherwise and really draw into those themes around spatial justice and the commons. I'll leave it there for now and pass over to the fabulous Bex Trevalyan.
Thanks, Andy. Hey everyone, good to see many familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Bex Trevalyan. I'm the co-initiator of a national cross-sector collaboration called Platform Places. We have a mission to unlock town centre buildings for amazing ideas that help us live affordably, sustainably and together. The deeper intention really is to localise and democratise who gets to own and transform our neighbourhoods. And as part of that, I'm co-initiating something called the Mycelial Network of community asset developers. That's a lot of big words. We'll unpack those soon. We're here to imagine differently because, as Rob Hopkins says, to change the story, to change the future, we have to first imagine differently. We have to collectively long for the future that we want to create before we can create it. My kind of personal mode is like roll up sleeves and be doing, but actually we've got to stop to change the thinking, change the imagination so that we can collectively long for this future and bring it into existence. So that's why we're here. And the kind of questions we want you to hold as we go through the next couple of hours are, what would it look and feel like if Oxfordshire and your neighbourhoods were ecologically safe and socially just places for everyone for generations to come? So lots in that question. Ecologically safe, socially just places for everyone for generations to come. And a kind of second follow-on question is, what does it look and feel like if neighbourhoods across Oxfordshire and across England and the world were held as commons, or a lot of them were held as commons? People coming together to care for and steward land, buildings, other assets that mean a lot to them. So I want you to hold these questions. We've got an amazing panel, which we'll come on to in just a minute. We'll hear from different perspectives from around England. And some of the work that's happening here in Oxfordshire. And then the second half, we'll go into small groups to deepen the conversations and bring in all of your experiences and voices too. So that's coming up. So just before I introduce the panel, I just want to introduce a bit more about the mycelial network that I mentioned. Everyone here is part of that mycelial network. 30 at the moment, and it's in an emergent stage, 30 community asset developers, so community organisations that are starting to acquire and transform, retrofit multiple buildings, portfolios of buildings and land for neighbourhood-wide transformation. And we'll hear the stories of what that means in a minute. But just to say that we've realised as a collective that we're stronger together rather than acting in isolation. Some of these big systems like changing how funding and finance works, changing the land system, that's not possible on our own in neighbourhoods. So we're having to collectivise and come together in a new culture and a new way of organising, which is inspired by mycelium, taking a lot of inspiration from the work of New Constellations, who look at how mycelium radically distribute resources and share nutrients between the trees, the fungi, the plants on the forest floor. One cell thick networks. So that's the new way of thinking, the new spirit of organising. So I think no better person to kind of kick us off with examples of what all this means in practice than Dr. Jess Steele, OBE, who is the CEO and commoner at large of Hastings Commons, and has really brought to us the concept of mycelium.
Thanks, Bex. Commoner at large means I get to come out and do things like this, which is really good fun. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've actually been doing in Hastings. So you're going to have to try and ignore the one behind us, yeah, and focus on the two sides. So this work is very, very focused on a small part of Hastings, an area called White Rock, which for a very long time, there we go, for a very long time has been suffering from very significant deprivation. It's in the 1% poorest neighbourhoods in the country. The dereliction comes from the long-standing collapse of a local industry, the publishing and print industry. And that had led to this huge building, the Observer building, was empty for 35 years. During that time, it had 13 different owners, one after another, each of them making money on it without doing a single repair. So buying it, getting planning permission, selling it on. So in a way, this building was the kind of epitome of what is wrong with dominant property systems. And so that made it very important to try and solve it, not only because it was a rotting building in an important neighbourhood, but because if we could solve this one, maybe we could start talking about solving the many, many more of these that are all over the country in various forms. So we tried to buy that building back in 2014. Instead, we ended up with the office block next door, long story, but 9-storey 1969 office block. We get this building, 9 stories, vacant possession. We've got a report from a quantity surveyor saying it's going to cost £1.9 million to convert it into what we want, which is affordable homes, affordable workspace, great social spaces. We don't have £1.9 million. We had at that point £80,000. So we threw away the report and we got on with spending the £80,000 on the first couple of floors, including giving away a floor to a local group that wanted to set up an art school. So you get people in, then you get a little bit more money. You put in 6 flats, get some more people in, get a little bit more money, etc. This was the only way we could make it happen. But when we look back on it, we called it phased organic development. It's a good way of giving something you had to do a nice label. But it actually meant that we started to realise this was the right way to do it, or certainly the right way for us, because if we had just had 1.9 million and we'd done all the work and then cut the ribbon, who would be there? There'd be building, but there'd be no community. Whereas doing it in that way, that phased approach over time, you're basically building the community as you go, as well as getting almost building the team. So building the ambassadors for the building, people who are in it and who are saying, come, join us. So that experience has been really important to us. And ever since then, that's the kind of approach we've been taking. And we've now got all of these buildings. And they look really little on the map, but the red one, that's 9 stories tall. The one next to it is the Observer building, which we finally got 5 years on. And that is 4,000 square metres of derelict wreck, full of pigeons and water and concrete bits falling off and all of that. That's what it was when we took it over on Valentine's Day 2019. It's not like that anymore. A lot of the building has been done, about 2/3 of it, and we're still working to complete the rest of it. So that kind of approach of building a bit at a time, of taking the risk. So in order to get that massive building, we first did the 9-storey office block, made that work, and then were able to use that track record and the value we'd created in it to buy the next building. So we literally mortgaged that one in order to buy that derelict wreck. So that's like a very, very rapid version of the story. There's the building, looking a bit nicer. What I wanted to kind of come on to really is this point about the commons. So all commons have 3 elements to them. a lot of people talk about the commons as if it's just the common resources, the buildings in our case, or lots of other things, it might be rivers or mountains or whatever, but the physical resource, that is only one part of the three parts. The other two is very much the commoners, the people who step up to both enjoy and take responsibility for those common resources. And then this third part is the verb, it's the doing word, it's commoning, it's an action. So you don't become a commoner by getting a badge or paying a fee, you become a commoner by stepping up to take over to those resources collectively with other people. And so my next slides are just lots of other people doing things in our buildings. And that, I think it's really important to recognise that people can do almost anything counts as commoning. If you're doing it collectively with your common resources and your fellow commoners, then it can just be sitting and chatting, it can be digging a hole, it can be planning the future, it can be absolutely any kind of activity. Because if commoners and commoning are what really matters beyond the resources, then building bonds is critically important. So the socialising, I always say to my team at the Commons, socialising is work, do it, like socialise, build the bonds. If you don't build the bonds, we're not building a commons, we're just getting some buildings, some physical buildings. So there's lots of different types as well. It's not just the buildings, it's the spaces between them are really important as part of that. I'm just going to show you, this is actually, I have to use this photo all the time. This photo was taken just before COVID in November 2019, and it sustained me all the way through lockdown because it was just like this dream, speaking of dream space. In a way, being in this room is a dream. If you remember 5 years ago, not being allowed to be together. So that one is a lovely version of being together. So really, just to finish off, this whole set of buildings, the idea is that these will stay in the ownership of the Community Land Trust, which is a forever organisation. It's not just about now, tackling problems now, it's about creating a long-term portfolio of common resources and behaviours that can manage those resources, and again, not just now, but in the long term. So one of the things we do is run a big youth club, and we do that because young people in Hastings need a place to be, but we also do it because they need to be the future trustees, team, tenants, participants, volunteers, etc. For this forever organisation. Just so these principles are the things that have come out of our work. We didn't go into the work going, oh, here's our principles. This is the principles that have emerged and that we talk about all the time. So, a lot of stuff about long term, but also about right now. Act quickly, get on with it right now, as well as thinking for that future generations. And that really, at the end of the day, it's more about building agency and power than it is about fixing old buildings. But when we fix those old buildings, we fix them for the long-term future. So a very strong heritage commitment and a very strong climate commitment for the future. Because what we're trying to do is not slash and burn renewal, but darning the fabric, both physically, culturally, politically, economically, socially, of our neighbourhood for the long term. And I'm going to leave it there on the darning the fabric.
Beautiful. Isn't that gorgeous? And I don't know if you said the numbers, Jess, but I think there's now 12 buildings, 9,000 square metres in long-term
173 tenants
ownership.
and
Yeah, an incredible lifetime's work. So a big...
And not finished.
and
by any
ongoing,
means.
And ongoing. And that kind of future thinking, this is a forever organisation. We're building the next generation. That is a spirit that we hear a lot in this mycelial network, and a lot coming through in these examples is really thinking, acting quickly and building momentum and building trust and relationships, but acting for the seventh generation, being a good ancestor. And that's a perfect frame to introduce our next panellist, Juliet Can, who's been doing the long work in East London over time with Stour Trust. Over to you.
Thank you. And I love the term commoner at large. And I think, just for me, that's the impetus to continue doing this work because it's about the bonds that bind us. And we've gotten to know each other over the last few years and just been inspired by each other. So this is part of also the outcome of the incredible work that us and most of you in the room do. So I am Juliet Can. I am co-founder of Stour Trust. And at Stour Trust, we democratise access to land, buildings and spaces. when did the work start? So I think the work started essentially probably 20 years ago, living in East London. East London at that time, for those of you who haven't been or are new to it, was probably one of the most deprived areas of London. I came to live there as a refugee from Uganda, and essentially there were so many people within that community that needed to essentially figure out how to survive the system, but also nourish themselves with the resources that they had, because that wasn't being catered for them. And that was the same for my community. And communities came together. They came together in spaces that were available in local church halls, in local community centres. I was sharing earlier that, there were community centres that were given, the key holder was appointed in the 70s, and that key holder still had the keys and was able to open up the space to whoever needed it. And we as community groups could go in there and essentially co-deliver services that we felt were needed for us. That could be food banks or, health services or creativity, dancing, everything that brought us joy, identity, feeling of anchorship, feeling of bonding together, and feeling like we could, live to see the next day. And over time, East London became a very interesting place for developers and for those who saw the value in the areas that actually the community had helped create and make vibrant. And watching that unfold into an interesting pattern of those with power and money almost taking the role in deciding how that area would shape and shift. And in a way, relating to the community in a way that felt very much power this way and communities are there. So communities being extracted from, but actually not seen as equal partners within those developmental plans. And for myself, being a sort of community organizer then before starting Stour Trust, I spent many, many nights running around, organizing community groups, church groups, youth groups, to basically give the power holders information and designs and insight into what we needed, and that would be designed into local plans. But actually, we never had the power to decide or to actually have the key to say we want this space for ourselves for the next generation. So seeing that happen over and over again and feeling like, actually, I've been doing all of this work, but I'm still in the same place. My community are still in the same place as we were 10 years ago, made us shift our perspective. So that came from actually, we're not just going to sit into a space temporarily and wait for us to be extracted from and then essentially pushed out. How can we develop an ecosystem where we can feel like we have a say? And that's how Stour Trust basically started. We started to take over leases on warehouses of community centres across East London, but we were naive. So we didn't understand the legal system or the lease system. So we would sign these leases that sounded fantastic, a warehouse for £600 a month. We would get our community's assets, which were the builders, the designers who are willing to give their time, and would create these incredible spaces. But 2 or 3 years down the line, the landlord would say, hey, this is good. Now it's worth £3,000. Thank you very much. So actually the value we created that should have gone back into the communities and to the services we wanted was then paid up in rent. And so we then thought, actually, this is a system that's not going to be beneficial for us either, because at every point we're going to be essentially pushed out again. And that happened to us for over a decade. And it got to the point where we started to understand leases, started to understand policies, started to understand regeneration systems, and started to question, how can communities anchor themselves in perpetuity within spaces and within buildings or within an ecosystem that nourishes them if they choose to for generations to come. And that's the question we tried to answer through trying to utilize policy, try to utilize planning systems, and we failed many times. But after a decade, we managed to crack it, I think, a little bit, where painfully, through a painful process, we managed to secure an asset for 1,000 years for communities in East London, which is now one of the most expensive places, actually, in London. And why is this important? Why is this important? It's because I believe in a sense of, I come from Uganda, where we have an incredible sense of community. If someone's in hospital, you go and visit them. If someone needs support, you're there for them. And you spoke about that earlier. How can we actually not just care for ourselves, care for buildings and what happens in them, but how do we actually create accountability for each other? And I think buildings and spaces help do that because it helps us interact. And I'll give that 2 examples of that. So when we had our second or third building, there was a gentleman called Dave. He was a retired firefighter. He retired early, I think at 48, with full salary, which made me very, envious. And so he had all this time. So he would come every single morning to our cafe, every single morning without fail. He didn't really have a family, but he felt that our space gave him something. It gave him a sense of community. So without fail, he'd be there having his flat white, sit around and just talk to people. And he would give people a smile. And Dave knew everybody that came through the building. So Dave was almost our connector. So Dave would come and say to us, by the way, Jean, who comes here, who's 80, she needs someone to talk to. Do you know anyone who could do that? And we would organise that. Or Dave would say, actually, I was cycling down the road and the lights are getting really bad. We need to figure out a way to bring light into the area. So we would help then, call the local authority and get that done. So having someone like Dave who is contributing, so it's not necessarily transactional, but contributing to the community is really vital. And it's spaces that we create that anchor that. Another example is we had a volunteer that fell very sick in hospital and his visa had expired 2 days before he fell sick. And the NHS said, well, actually, if he hasn't got a residency, we can't treat him beyond basic care. But there is a clause that says if he has a sense of community, if someone can come up and say he is part of the community, then there's always discretion to treat him. And essentially, Stour Trust was the community that stepped up to take accountability for that person. So I guess what I'm saying is part of doing this work is to be able to do many examples of those types of things. So it's not about just the building, but it's about the ecology we create around it. Because if I ever fall sick, I hope someone from my community will come and be accountable for me too. So that's a little bit about Stour, and we've done that for many, many years with very little funding, but we're hoping to now move into a space within this mycelial network that we can support others within the ecosystem and nourish each other with our skills, our talents, our expertise, but also looking at how we can fund that collectively so that there are many hubs of these types doing it in their way, but we're connected through this idea of actually we all want to belong. Thank you. It's fun.
And that 1,000-year lease, am I right in thinking that's peppercorn?
That's
rent?
peppercorn, so
That's
yes.
free for 1,000 years. Whenever Juliet joins a meeting, she's like, I've just come out of negotiations with the GLA or like with the landlord in Tower Hamlets with this community group. And she's just amazing juggling and really fostering, enabling those networks of care. As Jess said, as you said, like, where are the spaces for care? Let's enable Dave's in every place, Juliet's, Jess's, Victoria's, Andy's in every place. And I think to draw out that care, healing, spaces for recovering from the systems that we've been in, the kind of overdrive we've been in. I'd like to invite Victoria Barrow-Williams from People Dem Collective to share a bit about your journey and your vision for next steps of People Dem.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, seriously, just hearing your sort of story and your journey so far is so inspiring. And I think also because there are connections. I'm originally from, first of all, I'm Victoria, co-founder and director at People Dem Collective. We're based in Margate, but I was from Hackney and moved to Margate 17 years ago. And my mum moved to Margate 25 years ago. Very much sort of at that point of where people were planning the Olympics and there was changes happening. So I know so well that feeling of feeling sometimes pushed and not feeling like that, feeling that displacement. I think I felt that more so actually when I moved to Margate and returned to Dalston and feeling like, oh, I don't know where anything is and not recognising where my community was. So it's just so interesting to see how, I've ended up in Margate and also seeing and witnessing how that is also happening by the sea. And I think that, that feeling of place and home has always been a really fundamental part of my own practice. And it's kind of followed me. The importance of, regeneration, gentrification, and that murky line. How do we ensure that all of this resource and value that we're receiving from new communities coming and enjoying these spaces, how do we ensure that everyone benefits from it? So just to hear you, those connections is really important to me. So People Them Collective, we're based in Margate. We're a community group made up from the Black, Brown and Diaspora community. We came together probably sort of the end of 2019. A lot of us, we had within the collective teachers, artists, business owners, a real mix. But we'd all had a similar experience of needing space, feeling like, Margate's a super conscious town, like made full of loads of, creative individuals, really, really conscious town. And it felt like there was lots of things being signposted for different communities. But for our community, there wasn't really anything. And Kelly, the other co-founder, was like, right, you come into my front room. So that's where we started, in the front room. And we were meeting every Sunday, and I'm not going to lie, it was all about the food. We was bringing a dish. And that's kind of how we started. It was eating and sharing poetry, music, pieces of writing, while also like, what's a CIC? And what sort of structure is it going to be? And, we didn't realise that, within sort of 4 or 5 months, we'd have COVID. And we certainly didn't realise that, that, again, the world would be waking up, listening, and of course experienced the murder of George Floyd. And I'm really grateful, as you said, about the healing element, because that period of time was us healing together, talking about our experiences. And I think most of all what we were doing at that point was starting to build the programs, starting to build a way in which we wanted to work and collaborate. And it was at a pace that wasn't fast. We knew we wanted a space, but it was just important for us to come together. I guess we were commoning, right? And it was just really important for us. But of course, in 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, that really just created some momentum. So a few of us had gone to the marches in London, and we came back and we was like, well, we live here, we live in Margate, and we need to do something here. So really quickly, we mobilised, and I think the Facebook event was like 200 people. So when they asked us, it was like, yeah, 200 people, it's all right. But, as we started to march towards the Turner Contemporary, which is a sort of art gallery in Margate, a big sort of stakeholder, and the steps is kind of its front garden, right onto the sea, we soon realised it wasn't 200. There was about 4,000 people had turned up to this, and it was, of course, a mix of our community, but it was our allies, it was our local community beyond just Margate, Thanet, Kent. And I think it was in that moment very much so, when we was sort of kneeling and we're seeing this sort of this kind of like flow of people just coming down, and us as a collective who'd come together initially out of lack of space, realizing that this town was very much making I don't know, it felt like when we was kneeling down and you had the ocean. I'm trying to set the scene here, but you were right on the scene. You could just hear the ocean and, of course, seagulls. And it felt like there was a little bit of a silent sort of pact that we was all making collectively together as a community. We knew we wanted space, but I think at that moment we realized that, one, our community is saying, not here. This is how we're going to show up. But I think legacy was really important. And it was, what are we going to do in 10, 20, 30 years when we look back? Because I've got to stress, this isn't the first moment, right? We're not this isn't the first moment. There's been many moments. But what are we going to do when we look back at this moment? What is the legacy that is going to say, right, this is what we did. This was our reaction as a town. And it felt very possible in Margate. And our reaction was, it was going to be space, but it's going to be a big space. The vision was a national cultural centre. That's what kind of was born out of that. This needs to be a space, and the act of having space was going to also be an act of resistance, because, you know, we're in Margate. It already has a history around racism. It already has a history around classism. It already has that built-in history. And often people say, why Margate? And we're, well, why not? Why is it that we're only allowed to have these types of spaces in urban settings? Why are we not encouraging our community, who already, I must say, I mean, every time I say Margate, you'll have somebody, oh, I remember coming to Margate. Already has a really strong history of the Black, Brown and diaspora community visiting and experiencing the beach. We did a beautiful project where we were speaking to some Bayesian family and talking about when they were trying to find, when they came over, that beach that would remind them of home. And I think they said they tried Brighton and Stones. So Margate was where they settled. So there's, you know, there's already got that history in there. But for us, a space was very much about us creating mobility for our community. And for us, you know, for it to be in nature, you know, it's so important for us that this space is about healing, right? And of course, when we're imagining what it could be like, it was, you know, a place of education and art and culture, of course, but healing has always been at the very core of that. And I think that became, you know, more prevalent within our own experience going through this process. And that was nearly 5 years ago, how important healing is. I mean, healing is so important that both me and my co-founder 2 years ago, due to our own lived experience of doing this work, started doing a course on massage. And we really wanted to remind ourselves every time we do this work just how important the healing element is to us. And it means that we get to give each other a massage every week, which is great. But it was really important that we created an ecosystem where we were reminded about that. And we've continued to that practice. And it's something that we continue to want to bring into the space. So sort of whistle-stop tour of the journey. So through that, we put on exhibitions. As part of that march, we collected all of those placards. We captured footage, and we did an exhibition in the Turner Contemporary. That was one of our first things. We sent out an email to everyone in our town and was like, do not give a hurried response. Please don't just put that black square on your Instagram and think that's it, because it's not. Let's think about what this legacy is and how we can really make a change. And also to let them know, this is our intention. We want to have a space and we want to be part of this ecosystem. And one of the first things that we did was that we're going to put on an exhibition. And I don't know if anyone has experiences working with these types of institutions. They're like 5 years ahead. But they listened and we did it. And again, you had 18,000 people attending that exhibition across a month. And again, the demographic completely changed of who was coming. And again, we're still sort of in that moment of COVID and kind of some restrictions. It got covered by the New York Times. And again, it was showing an example of how Margate was reacting to what had happened across the world, really. So we went on after that. It kind of coincided with the town deal, which was this opportunity for towns across the UK who'd been identified as towns that could go for this pot of money. I think it was 24 million they could go for. And again, it was kind of on the balance of needing some sort of investment for regenerating, very much based on the social economics around the town. And we was part of that process. So that meant we were partnered with a stakeholder called Dreamland, which is an old theme park stroke music venue. And we kind of went through that process. And I think, like you said, yourself, is naively, maybe, very trusting of the experience. We understood, none of us had the experience of opening a cultural centre, but what we did is we knew how to connect with our community. We knew how important it was, the work that we was doing, and that we were the ones that were facilitating it. We knew how to work with other stakeholders and collaborate, but we didn't necessarily know how to navigate the council, how to navigate that process. So we was very much learning, as we went on. And I think that was the thing, is that we did come out of activism, but we was really hoping that this process would give us mentorship, give us, an entry point to something that normally our type of organisation does not get. And so what was promised was that we were going to be having a space that was on the Dreamland site. 1.2 million was going to be invested in making it available for the public to be able to enter, so it was safe. And then also there was some money for sort of developing everything that sits inside the building. So we went through this very long process of 5 years, and you know, there was many different projects that were happening. And again, the same, a lot of these projects not necessarily happening, takes a long time going through that process. But unfortunately, what did happen was at the beginning of last year, Dreamland was bought by Live Nation, which is a international music promoter who have venues and obviously promote festivals, etc. as international. They don't really need the money. So they pulled out from the process and then said that they would like to do something that was more in line with the heritage of the building. And so then last year, it kind of completely disrupted everything for us as an organisation. It meant that we'd gone through this process, all of the work that we'd done. And again, you know, sometimes I think this goes against us, is that we're really super resourceful, right? So we were giving this building that was kind of a disused office building. And what we managed to create in there was art studios. We were able to incubate up to 10 organisations across the 5 years, office space, programmes, within education, within healing, because we weren't just going to sit in the building and do nothing. That's just not, you know, we were still in activism mode within that speed, right, of let's create opportunities, and not just for us, it's for our ecosystem. So even now, when we talk about it, people are like, well, you had your building. That wasn't the building. The building's over here, which was supposed to have this 1.2 million. So we've, over the last 5 years, with no core funding, have managed to sustain having a premises that has created so much opportunity for our community, has created safety for our community. But unfortunately, that was disrupted last year. So we officially moved out of that office space a couple of weeks ago. We are currently desperately trying to hold the council accountable for what's happened, because we were used a lot, leveraged within that application to secure in total 22 million. We were cited within that application, I believe it's 8 times. We were spoken about, and our roadmap was kind of weaved within that. So we were spoken about in terms of this building that we was going to have, spoken about in relation to how it was going to create opportunities for the Black, Brown and Diaspora community to engage with a heritage site. We was leveraged throughout that, as well as being connected to the Creative Land Trust as well, and our desire for permanent premises. So where we are now is very much trying to hold the council accountable for that. We are negotiating heads of terms for another building. And yes, I mean, trying to be positive. I do feel really positive, right? I do feel, you know, I think it's important to share these experiences, because it isn't easy. And also there's a huge amount of barriers that are there, specifically for the Black and Brown community as well. The way in which it feels like a magic trick, I think you would call it gaslighting, how we had something and now we potentially walk away with nothing connected in any shape or form to that bid, is quite a thing to have to sort of process. However, I think what's been really beneficial for us has been our network, has been our ecosystem. And there's many networks that are sort of informal and formal that we're part of that have really supported us in making us also see other people's journeys, right? Like when I'm sitting here and I'm hearing that, because unfortunately for us anyway, our lived experiences, we also have the thing of, oh, we're an imposter anyway. Well, we shouldn't really be here. This reaffirms that we're having to deal with our community who already have that distrust. You should have never done it. Why did you trust them? We told you. So being able to experience and hear the experiences of other community members, other organisations who have gone through the same, it does help for us to not take it so personally, and for us to see that there is hope. But I think it also demonstrates, when we look 5 years on since the murder of George Floyd, what really has changed. How do we hold accountable for promises that were made 5 years ago? And what I'm really, the distribution of power. We must also see that it's really important. It's not just, representation. It's how do we ensure that we're creating opportunities for Black and brown diaspora leaders to be able to foster those relationships, to sustain a space, to have some agency. I think that's really important. I think that's kind of where I am with it. It's really important that there is that distribution of power, but it's about creating opportunity for agency and allowing us to be able to step up and advocate for us. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. So collective solidarity, support, hugs to Peopledom and to you, Victoria, and your team. We've been hearing the highs and lows, a lot of the lows in the last year, and there is hope, but it's really important to acknowledge the spatial injustice. We're talking here about spatial justice, and what does that look and feel like? It's like, well, that's what it doesn't look like. That's what bad feels like. So how do we move from here and acknowledge that power is in the wrong place, wealth is in the wrong place? It radically, urgently needs to shift. And I think that's similar to a realization that Makespace has had over the last couple of years. And over to you, Andy, to share stories from the home turf of how that's been and where you're headed next.
Thank you, Bex. And yeah, thank you to Juliet, Victoria and Jess. It feels so important and authentic to be here speaking about our journey alongside others. And, it speaks for itself. The show Don't Tell, in the authenticity and the depth in all of those stories, has really inspired, nourished and resourced Makespace along our journey for the last 7 years. And it's why we are who we are and how we've come here. And it's been such a joy to share some of our story with each of you moving around our spaces earlier today. I know our story is familiar to lots of you, but for those who are perhaps hearing about our work for the first time, we started right here in the centre of Oxford 7 years ago. Essentially a group of architects, artists, makers, organisers who are being priced out of this wonderful city, the least affordable city in the UK, one with the highest levels of inequality. And those narratives often get tucked away or they don't get surfaced. And so threats of displacement or historic displacement is real, and it's woven through the fabric of the city. We started trying to address that by unlocking buildings on a temporary meanwhile basis, sort of prototyping and experimenting with different ways of bringing buildings back into use that actually centre the people that live there and the people that are trying to create ethical and nurturing livelihoods for themselves. We started with one building and then supported with some capital grant from Meanwhile in Oxfordshire, supported by the local authority, by a network of funders coming through capital government, had the opportunity to adapt and develop that model. And in the last 18 months, in the last 7 years, but within an 18-month window, we had to unlock 28 vacant buildings right the way across the county. And that was an incredible moment for us of seeing how to not just adapt and develop our model, but how the barriers, the spatial injustice, the challenges played out in different contexts and the challenge for different communities right the way across the county. That also meant that we expanded in a sudden moment, and it meant that we had to work really hard to build and reconnect relationships with the places and the spaces in which we were intervening. And that has been the focus of the last 3 years since we went on that large expansion journey. And we've now been really trying to ask ourselves, as we've been building connections in those hubs, as we've supported nearly 250 organisations into affordable working, community organising, making and repairing spaces, how do we sustain those spaces? How do we sustain those connections? But also, how do we build and deepen our impact in those places? So all of those spaces were originally unlocked on a temporary meanwhile basis on leases of 2 to 10 years. And that's been a fantastic opportunity to many of those organisations. But we also hear that echo of potential reinforcing, reproducing of precarity that comes from a meanwhile lease. And so we're trying to work out how we can not just build towards longer term leases, but also towards community ownership and beyond, to challenge the very inequities that exist within the kind of existing ownership and property models that are that we're challenged to work within. And so, as well as trying to continue to support the organisations that are in our spaces, as well as trying to continue to undertake energy improvements, undertake ways of building collective capacity, we've also been digging into our history, into the dark matter, into the hidden layers that are basically constraining our ability to dream and to try and think about an alternative system. And that comes through in what we've heard here in the contracts, the systems and processes that are creating exclusive ownership and relationship models, the funding, the resources, the knowledge, and how that's very much held in short-term project-based funding, or it's resources that are not fairly distributed, and then underpinning it all, the values and beliefs, this idea of an extractive mindset, this idea of property as exclusive right and right to exclude. And so in doing that, daring to dream bigger and think about building through and beyond community ownership to building a network that is anchored in spatial justice and this idea of the commons and commoning, as Jess said. And it's not just, I think, about the common resources, and it's not just about the act of collectivizing, but it's also kind of recognizing the sort of political nature in which we're operating as well, and the political forces that are going against us. So I'll leave it there for now. But yeah, we're so delighted to have this group and be part of a mycelium network that's allowing us to build collective capacity and demonstrate collective impact above and beyond what's going on in Oxfordshire.
Big round of applause for Makespace. Andy, before we finish up, I know that there is a kind of a space that is helping to transition to this longer term way of working and ownership. So do you want to just mention a bit about that? Because I think that represents a really exciting transition point.
Thank you, Bex. Yeah, absolutely. So just a short walk from here, we are working with a group of partners to unlock a multi-generational space on George Street, so right in the heart of the city. And for us, that's our first opportunity to move beyond short-term meanwhile leases to multi-generational change. It's not yet community ownership. It's not yet the 1,000-year lease that we're working towards, but it is very much in those footsteps and moving towards that. And we're extremely excited about the inquiry of what a spatial justice hub, what a civic space that fosters connection, collaboration, and dreaming otherwise could look like. And as part of that new space, shifting and expanding our posture. So far, we've been very much brokering and supporting organizations directly into spaces that we hold and we steward. And we're recognizing now that it's absolutely critical that we're supporting organizations to take the keys and secure those buildings directly for themselves, operating in a facilitative and enabling posture. And we're doing that very much with a series of local groups now, supporting them into taking and holding their own space. And we hope that George Street will be an opportunity for expanding and developing that model of supporting organisations to claim the space on their high streets that's rightfully theirs.
And how long is that lease?
The lease on George Street is 40 years.
40 years. So we've gone from 6 months to 2 years to 40 years. So it's not 1,000 years yet, but it's amazing. It's amazing. What a gift in the centre of Oxford. So hats off. And Victoria and I and Lorna and a couple of others have been on a tour of some of Makespace's spaces today. We've seen the Ukrainian women running the seamstress tailoring space in Aristotle Lane, a woman called Cass doing the only kind of weaving space and studio in Oxford, really passionate there. Lula running an Eritrean food business right near the station, really gorgeous space with artists upstairs, a free poetry library at the back. What else is going on? There's just so much going on. And universally, those people said to us, we would not be here without Makespace. We would not be here without Makespace. The flexibility, the human connection, the care, the ecosystem, the co-funding, the affordable rents, the pauses of the rents when I can't make it, the being able to be flexible, move into different spaces. It's just absolutely transformational for the whole ecosystem. So there's 250 organisations that have been supported by Makespace. Who in here works for Makespace? They're all at the back over here, but they're working their bums off. So big love to these guys. Yeah. And of course, hosting today. So just a couple more words about the mycelial network. We'll open up for questions, and then we're going to get into small groups. So just to give you a sense of the scale of the network, I mentioned there are 30 in the network at the moment, 30 organisations, but between just 10 of them, there are over 100 buildings taken into long-term community ownership. That's £25 million in fixed assets. That means something for economists looking at that. This is actually starting to have real economic change. That's leveraged £180 million in additional money to flow into communities. So extra community-led regeneration budget that's come in through grants, through loans, through co-funding. And that's over 2,000 local organisations supported into long-term, affordable, secure space, transformational for people's lives, work, purpose, a sense of belonging in a place, ability to belong, ability to care, ability to socialise. Socialising is the work. Love that quote. My first job was community activator in Impact Hub in South London, and I was told the one thing I had to do was be friends with everyone and make it the best party. And if I'd done that, then I'd succeeded. So here's some more of that. And so that's the mycelial network. The work we are doing really is to mobilize huge money to change the funding ecosystem by coming together to say, actually, we need to unlock hundreds of millions of philanthropic money to move to be distributed in a networked way quickly to fund the teams doing this work. That the lack of core money is crippling. People are burning out, sacrificing, maxing out credit cards and remortgaging homes. So we need that core money. As Platform Places, we've secured a first 2.5 million through National Lottery, but we're looking for 100 million really as a first raise. But it's a perpetual fund. It's way bigger. We're actually targeting the £84 billion that is locked up in the 300 largest charitable foundations in their endowments in the UK. So we're not doing an 84 billion raise, but this is the scale of ambition I want us all to be thinking about. We're like buying back or taking back the land, the buildings, the assets that belong to these communities, that enable us to live, to belong, to face the crises that are coming. And so that's the kind of challenge and the work of the mycelial network. We've got a collective of funders coming with us and rallying with this call. So here's hoping. I want to invite some questions, if there are any, and we need you to use the mic because it's being recorded. So any questions to any of our wonderful panelists? Stick up your hand. Lady from Puerto Rico.
Hi, Maria Olga from Puerto Rico. I co-lead the first agrarian community land trust in our islands. My question is very specific. Who owns these buildings that you have long-term leases for? Who owns them?
So most of our buildings are freehold. So we have purchased them and they are freehold held within the Hastings Commons. But some of them are, one of them is on a 125-year lease from the local authority. And then we have some where local owners have come to us saying, do you want to buy my building? And we've said, yeah, we'd love to, but we don't have the money. So we've done a short-term lease with an option to buy. And we're desperately trying to raise the money to finish that purchase. But we're quite unusual, I think, in having those freeholds.
Yeah, I think for us in our 999-year lease, the freehold is held by a private entity, so a private developer, essentially. So that's the legal connection we have. But what we've managed to secure within our lease is that it's called a virtual freehold, so we'll have all the rights as if it was a freehold, essentially.
Freehold is legal mechanism.
Is a UK thing, actually. So freehold basically comes from you're holding it from the Crown. So the Crown owns everything, but they granted 1,000 years ago the freeholds, mainly to the nobility, to the aristocracy in those days. So they granted freehold, which basically meant you have the right under the Crown to own everything, own this piece of land. And so quite often people own their house freehold, but if you have a flat, that would be a lease, because obviously the freehold is about the ground to some extent. So.
Does that answer your question? We've got another one here.
Just from our side, so it's a mixture, predominantly Oxford colleges, unsurprisingly. Some local authority, the 40-year space on George Street, will be held freehold in perpetuity by the local authority, so it remains in public hands, but it's being stewarded by a community organisation. And we have some private entities as well, kind of a few offshore.
Thank you very much. It's really informative. I was wondering if you would provide more information about the business model exactly. So you get the building as a freehold, and then you get to decide who is getting the building to work on something or to use it in a certain way. So what are your criteria in selecting the people who are getting this building, and how do you monitor with them? And at the same time, are they going to pay rents? For how do you decide how much is the rent? So a more kind of, a peek on the behind the scenes of going through this processes of from the start till the end, given that many of us are not from the UK. So it would be very helpful if we get an idea. Yeah.
For us, it's a combination of residential, places where people actually live, and workspace and other kinds of social spaces. The criteria is the same for all tenants. So it's based on need. You have a need for an affordable place to live or work, and then local connection. So you have a strong connection to Hastings as a town. And then two other criteria. One is enthusiasm for the ethos. So you literally want to be part of this thing rather than just you want a flat or you want an office. And then willingness to contribute, to be part of it. So not just you want to be part of it, but you've got something to bring, whatever that is. And we don't tell people you've got to bring this particular thing, because we recognise everyone's different. So people bring whatever they want to bring, but in the criteria, that is one of the things that they actually put forward. This is what I want to bring, what I want to contribute. The spaces are, they kind of fix themselves to some extent in that we own things like caves. Well, they're not going to be homes, obviously, but we own this office block, which could all be homes, but we didn't want it all to be homes. We wanted it to be mixed use, so we put some homes in and some office workspace. So all the spaces are very different from each other, but the criteria are the same throughout. I'm trying to think of the other bits of your question about what. So the rents. So our big thing was that Hastings has been for many, many decades a very affordable place to live and to work. And so when we got started 2014, 2015, what we wanted to do was protect that affordability for the long term. So we set the rents more or less at 2015 levels, and then capped them. So they go up with inflation, but they never go up apart from with inflation. So in theory, we're at exactly the same spot as we were in 2015. In fact, what's happened is that inflation did a crazy thing. Liz Truss helped with that. So there was a crazy thing where inflation went massive, and we could not justify putting up the rents to that level because people just wouldn't have afforded it. So we capped it much lower, which does mean there is a long-term problem, because that means we are no longer keeping up with inflation, and it does mean it's a problem for us long-term. It's also a problem, that not particularly, but one of the big problems for us in Hastings is that it's getting more and more polarised. So some people are getting poorer over the last decade, and then there are quite a lot of much, much wealthier people moving in. So we've got a much more polarised situation than we used to have. We used to use median local income and say people shouldn't spend more than a third of their income. So we use median local income, 1/3, felt really good. But it's changed so much because there are so many people who can't afford that median version now. So there's no perfect answer to it. I think what we try and do is, what is the fair thing to do? And let's talk about that with lots of different people and see what feels fair to lots of different people. And you come up with a formula. We might well change our formula because it no longer feels quite as fair as it did when we invented it.
Thank you.
Victoria, I wonder how you're thinking about fairness and affordability in this context.
Yeah, I think for us, we understand in a weird way, the thing that comes first actually is, rather than being rents, is actually creating a space where people feel like they actually are allowed to be in it. So, but for us, even just having studio spaces for artists, we didn't charge them anything because we knew that there was something about trying to get them into that space. So we wanted to remove that barrier in terms of cost, because we knew that there's also a barrier of them feeling like they even should have a space. So for us, I think as we sort of look towards the new future and reimagine what those spaces are, of course, it would, business-wise, we need to think about how much it's going to cost for people to be in these spaces, for us to, sustain what we want to do. But a huge part of us is getting that balance, ensuring that people can access the space. Just because we have the space doesn't mean that some people are going to access it. And there are plenty of people within our community that might feel that they have that privilege to access, but those aren't the ones that we're trying to reach. We're wanting to create opportunities for people that don't necessarily feel like they have space. And the magic that happens with that is so rewarding, to have people within our spaces who've had office spaces. I mean, that's the thing that's been quite, I think, upsetting for some, is that some people are just getting warmed up, because it takes time. And we were in that space for 5 years. And just to see the confidence that our community gets for being in that space and having that pride of being part of something is really important. So agreed, it's important for us to strike the balance and ensure that we make things that are accessible in terms of people accessing it through funds. But I think also it's deeper than that. It's about ensuring that the right people are accessing it. And if they're not, then it's the why. And that's the puzzle for us. How do we ensure that this is a space that everyone can benefit? It's going back to that thing again. We are, creating value and bringing something really exciting into a town and reimagining these futures. However, some people aren't even there. They're not even had the ability of being able to have the risk to imagine. To imagine is, seriously, it's a privilege. People don't necessarily have that privilege of, let me pretend a new future. So we have to always keep this in mind when we're doing these buildings and we're creating these spaces. How are we ensuring that people can even access the first step? Because that imagining is risk. And our community can't take risks, right? For a lot of us, we can't take risks because, we took risk and look what happened. So it's really important that we're not missing that bit out.
And having that space that is free, that is radically accessible to a group of people is something that shifts a mindset, right?
Absolutely.
Space that is free. And can we imagine that? Can we imagine at least part of these buildings being free? And
that's the cross-subsidy thing, isn't it? So, yeah, I've talked about rent, but we have spaces that are totally non-transactional, a public living room, and that is subsidised by the spaces that are charged for.
Having housing is an important part of that mix. I'm conscious of time, and I want to give us all time to have more conversations in smaller groups. So I think we're gonna wrap the questions there, and we can continue questions in smaller groups with the panelists. Sorry, I know we gave you massive questions and not enough time, but want to just have a little 5 minutes that we've got left to hear back from each group, a couple of gems that came up, that bubbled up, a couple of kind of dreams or imaginings that has sparked some excitement or joy. So let's start with this group over here. Does anyone want to take the mic and share a couple of gems?
Oh man, I thought I could get away with this just by being the doodler, but now I have to actually speak to the doodles. Yeah, we started with the look and feel of our future Oxfordshire. What would that be? It would be greener, it would be cleaner, there'd be less energy, we'd be focusing on mobility, accessibility. We'd be recognising Oxford is not Oxfordshire, which was wicked. We'd be focusing on community infrastructure that could actually keep up with the rate of building of homes, and that civic space is there and integrated with that new building. So that was the vision. And then we started getting into some of the methods of how we'd get there. And we had wicked ideas around stewards of places in Oxfordshire and how these stewards would be celebrated and joined up and supported. We'd be recognising that it's a we thing, not a me thing. We were really leaning into Jess's beautiful words around we look out for each other and look after the place. We'd be seeing Oxfordshire as pockets of possibility and commons rather than Oxfordshire being a territory of commoning, but recognising that there's this constellation of pockets and they're connected in this mycelial way. And we were recognising that in all of this method of achieving that amazing vision, we'd be requiring endless conversations again and again and again, and it is all relational around agreed values.
Thanks, Naomi. Beautiful.
So we talked a lot about how to make the concept of the commons feel as inclusive to everybody as possible, and that really what we're all talking about is belonging. So how do we make that real and practical and tangible? So like really about everyday participation. Nikki shared a really nice quote, which I'm just going to read out, and then we've got a few things that we think could be happening by 2035. So the quote is by Andre Sneer Magnuson. Sorry. Yep. We know what is happening. We know what needs to be done. Only you will know if we did it. So by 2035, we wanted to see commons being a more common model. And on a more practical level, a publicly available list of properties that are available in a given area so that people that are in need of space can just look up what's available, what the eligibility criteria might be for that, what would the rents be, do you need to have been in existence for 3 years, and those sorts of things. So just being able to look that up somewhere. Inverting some of the norms and making use of existing spaces. So we gave an example of school canteens being used to host community dinners, with the students being involved in inviting their neighbours. The next thing was, for us to have a stronger shared understanding of what a space needs to look and feel like to be safe, and to really create belonging. So trying to shift from a place of assuming what that would look like, because it's obviously different for all of us. Better facilities for those from the traveller community who might be looking for regular facilities that we aren't even talking about right now, showers, kitchens, things like that. And linked to that, but not only that, free open access evening space, which is often something that we have less of, open green space. And then maybe a little bit ambitious on the last point, since we're talking about 2035, but post-capitalist community infrastructure.
Whoop! Cheers to that, nice one. Thank you.
More trees and plants across all of Oxford. We would be hearing the sound of children laughing. They're safe everywhere. They're even swimming in the communal river. And it would be really clear where people could go and that they belong here.
Beautiful.
Okay, so our question was around what lessons there are for neighbourhoods. And we touched on a few things. It was more like, a stream of consciousness conversation that we had. But essentially accepting that we can't do it all ourselves, that relationships are key, and that access to things like expertise, advice, connections and networks should be leaned into to make sure that you're really making the most of the potential that you can unlock. We talked about how maintaining momentum is exhausting and how to ensure capacity. So taking that time to reflect and think on how best to work with the volunteer teams, but also founders and organisers as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, two key things that we spoke about. We spoke about a lot of things, but one thing that kept on coming up was green spaces, planting, growing on verges, in gardens, in public spaces, more trees, urban forests. And the other thing that we spoke about, because of where we are, is more libraries, long-lived libraries, intergenerational, open, so many resources here. So this is actually a really great example of that. But more places that are supporting to reinventing how we think about space, how we meet, how we organise, like libraries.
Thank you. So coming up to 5:30, so I'm going to bring us to a close. We've started to dream and imagine a future that we all now need to not just long for, but insist on, demand, call for relentlessly, which we shall be doing, and keep the conversations, keep dreaming. There's many layers to this work. So a huge thank you to you all for your participation, and please join me in thanking Juliet, Victoria, Jess and Andy and the Makespace team for hosting us and sharing their stories so generously. Andy, are there any final words?
Just to say, yeah, thank you to Bex, all of you, for participating. This wasn't just actually a conversation. This was about us prototyping the future by leaning into it. And that's exactly the spirit that we're taking from this room. And you've probably seen on your chairs, there was a little handout leaflet called Common Futures, which is all about us coming together every month over the next 6 to 8 months at least, hopefully into the following year, prototyping the future space on George Street and continuing to lean into this imagination space and bring it into being. So we love you to continue the conversation, continue prototyping that future that we long for and want to create together through those upcoming events. But thank you so much for joining us, and especially to Bex for holding the space.